Welcome to our channel. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing so we can bring more stories like this to you.
Havenwood's Whisper. Havenwood, once a verdant sanctuary cradled by the azure mountains, now lay scarred. Emerald meadows were now sere stubble, rustling like ancient scrolls beneath foot, and Willow Creek, a mere trickle of silt-laden water, struggled to persist. The air, heavy and stagnant, shimmered with relentless heat. Even the stalwart pines, Havenwood's age-old guardians, sagged, their needles coated in brick-colored grime. Elias Thorne, his face a testament to decades spent coaxing life from the unforgiving soil, stood on his farmhouse porch, his gaze sweeping across the desiccated land. The scorching sun bore down on his silvered head, yet he remained unmoved. Slate-colored eyes, narrowed, picked out the subtle shifts. The escalating dance of dust devils further up the slopes, the frantic chorus of crickets, a desperate prelude to silence, the dawn's unnerving absence of birdsong, a void more ominous than thunder. These were familiar warnings, etched into his very being, whispered by the land's dying breath. "She's bone dry," he rasped, his voice like gravel grinding on granite. He'd weathered droughts before, harsh tests of resilience. But this felt like surrender. He spat a dark stream of tobacco juice onto the arid ground, a meager offering to an indifferent fate. A ribbon of dust unfurled along the mountain road, fracturing the afternoon stillness. A battered pickup, the hue of sun-baked earth, groaned into view, its engine laboring. Elias frowned, watching its approach. Visitors to Havenwood were rare these days, especially those who arrived in vehicles like that. The truck shuddered to a halt in the town square, raising a vortex of grit that momentarily veiled Havenwood's skeletal remains. The general store, its paint flaking like peeling sunburn. The boarded-up schoolhouse, its windows like vacant eyes. The neglected clinic, its porch drooping under the weight of inertia. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the harsh light, tall and wiry. His movements were precise, almost feral. A worn denim shirt clung to his frame, its sleeves rolled to reveal sinewy forearms. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of a Stetson. Yet Elias perceived the rigid set of his jaw, the intensity simmering in his gaze. This was a man acquainted with hardship, a man carrying unspoken burdens. Jason Statham unfolded himself from the cab, his spine cracking like tinder, his gaze swept the desolate scene, his expression unreadable as he registered the bleakness. Havenwood, more forlorn, more diminished than the photo suggested. He'd sought sanctuary here, a place to disappear within the anonymity of a fading town, a refuge from his past. Havenwood was chosen with intent, a place where his presence would be met with indifference. He headed toward the only visible sign of occupation, the clinic, its door standing slightly ajar. A faint chime echoed as he stepped inside, announcing his arrival. The air was heavy with the tang of disinfectant mingled with a subtle sweetness, hinting at floral notes. Maya Rodriguez, her raven hair drawn back into a tight coil, was attending to a young boy's arm. The child, barely 7, appeared pale and frail, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Just a scratch, Miguel," she reassured him, her voice soft yet firm. "All better." She applied a bright bandage, decorated with cartoon animals. Turning, Maya noticed the stranger framed in the doorway, an imposing figure. His sheer presence dominated the cramped space. She recognized the fatigue etched into his features, that haunted expression mirrored on the faces of so many remaining residents of Havenwood. "May I help you?" she inquired, her tone measured. "Just passing through," he rumbled, his voice a low timbre. "Looking for lodging." Maya scrutinized him, her gaze unwavering. She detected something beneath the layers of stoicism and guardedness, a spark of hope, perhaps, or merely naked desperation. "We don't get many visitors these days," she observed, her eyes holding his. "The inn is defunct, but Mrs. Peterson occasionally rents rooms above the general store." "Thank you," he responded, about to depart. "The dust cough is worsening," Maya interjected, halting him, "especially among the children. And dehydration cases are mounting. People aren't taking it seriously enough." Jason hesitated, his hand on the door. He resisted involvement, a mistake he'd made before. However, something within Maya's plea, the stark urgency radiating from her, resonated deep within him reluctantly. He turned back, his face reflecting an uneasy resolve. The unseen weight of Havenwood's silent appeal had begun to burden him, the spark. The air tasted of pulverized earth and bygone chances. Elias Thorne expectorated, the gritty residue a constant companion in these rainless times. He rested against the dilapidated fence separating his barren acreage from the scrubby wasteland bordering it. The heavens were a contusion of purple, swollen with the illusion of a downpour, a mirage that dissolved daily into relentless heat. The land fissured, and morale flagged, then, like a celestial reprimand, it struck a solitary, brutal stroke of lightning, a searing white brand upon the distant edge of the world, followed by a thunderclap that vibrated through Elias's bones, his insides. Clenched as he watched a black pillar ascend from the distant ridge, the fringe where the pines whispered secrets to the wind, combustion. Instantly, viscerally, he recognized it, the desiccated undergrowth, the needle-strewn forest floor primed to ignite, the wind, an eager accomplice, poised to spread devastation. He'd witnessed this malice before, albeit on a smaller scale, a fire that had still grazed too close. Elias straightened, the protest in his joints ignored. He had to alert them. He discovered a small group of villagers outside the mercantile, swatting at the air with newsprint fans, their faces etched with ennui. Hemlock, the elder, held court, lamenting the price of livestock feed. Elias shouldered through, his voice hoarse. Lightning, he announced, gesturing towards the horizon. Fire on the ridge. Hemlock's gaze was dismissive. Probably just some weeds. Happens near every summer. Dies down all by itself. Murmurs of assent rippled through the small gathering. They'd seen minor blazes, irritations, quickly extinguished. This is different, Elias pressed, his voice gaining urgency. It's bone dry out there, the winds picking up. It could run wild. Martha, Hemlock's daughter, her features sculpted by years of grueling labor, offered a scornful glance. Don't go looking for trouble, Elias. We've got enough already. He attempted to articulate the conflagration he envisioned, a hungry beast devouring all before it, but his words felt feeble, lost in the wave of lethargy that had descended upon Havenwood like a suffocating blanket. They didn't want to hear it. Weary of anxiety, of struggle, of the futile pursuit of hope, defeated, Elias withdrew. He understood these people. Inflexible, resistant to change. They'd only react when flames licked at their foundations. Meanwhile, miles away, in the comparative cool of his upstairs sanctuary, Danny was fixated on his monitor. Usually engrossed in online gaming communities, today he'd stumbled upon something different. A real-time emergency dispatch feed, generally teeming with reports of minor accidents and nuisance complaints, now crackling with urgent messages. Possible uncontrolled burn, location Black Ridge vicinity. Multiple calls reporting smoke. Units responding. Danny zoomed in on the map, his fingers dancing over the controls. Black Ridge. That was nearby, too damn close. He navigated to a citizen journalism site. The image that materialized sent a chill through him. An immense column of smoke, illuminated by the inferno raging below, already visible from Havenwood. A wave of terror crashed over him. He tried his mother, only to be met with silence. Seizing his keys, his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribcage. He had to reach the village. He had to warn everyone. Back in the community, the sun dipped below the hills, creating elongated, ominous shadows. The air had grown noticeably warmer, infused with a subtle, acrid tang. Still, most dismissed it. Perhaps just a neighborhood cookout. Elias, however, detected the change. A whisper in the breeze, a crawling sensation along his skin. He scrutinized the ridge, and even in the fading light, he saw it. A crimson glare, no longer a distant smudge, but a palpable, encroaching threat. He knew then, with chilling certainty, that Havenwood was facing annihilation, and that only a fragile hope stood between it and the inexorable flames. The spark had found purchase, and the kindling awaited. Inferno's embrace. The scent of pine had been replaced by something acrid, something choked with menace. Elias Thorne coughed, pulling his bandana higher over his nose. The wind, no longer carrying the cool mountain air, now howled like a banshee, whipping embers against his already scorched leather jacket. He could feel the heat radiating from the approaching inferno even through the thick fabric. He'd been driving his battered pickup truck, the engine groaning in protest, along the northern perimeter, trying to warn the outlying farms. Most hadn't needed convincing. The orange glow on the horizon spoke volumes, but Old Man Hemlock, stubborn as a mule, had insisted on staying to save his prize-winning zucchini. Elias had wasted precious minutes arguing, finally dragging the man, protesting and flailing, into the truck. Now, as he approached the main road leading into Havenwood, he saw it. A wall of fire, an impossible, terrifying curtain of flame, had already consumed the forest bordering the asphalt. The road was impassable. The only way in or out, gone. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding dangerously on the loose gravel. "Damn it!" he roared, more to the uncaring landscape than to Hemlock, who was huddled in the passenger seat, muttering about his zucchini. Havenwood was now completely cut off. He turned the truck around, the tires spitting gravel, and sped back toward town. He needed to get to the town square. Raise the alarm. The volunteer fire department, bless their hearts, were already stretched thin, battling spot fires and trying to create fire breaks. This was a different beast entirely. As he drove, he saw people beginning to react. Farmers were frantically herding livestock, their faces etched with panic. Children cried, clinging to their parents. The air was thick with ash, making it hard to breathe, hard to see. He laid on the horn, a desperate, blaring warning to the clinic. Maya Rodriguez was trying to keep her composure. She'd seen the smoke hours ago, a distant plume that she'd hoped would remain distant. Now, the sky outside the window was a bruised orange, and the air tasted like burnt metal. Little Leo, recovering from a nasty bout of pneumonia, coughed weakly in his mother's arms. "He needs his nebulizer, Mrs. Peterson," Maya said, trying to sound reassuring, though her own heart was pounding in her chest. "Keep him inside. Keep the windows closed. I'll check on you later." As Mrs. Peterson hurried out, clutching Leo tightly, Maya moved swiftly, her movements precise and efficient. She started gathering supplies. Bandages, antiseptic, oxygen tanks, anything that might be needed in a crisis. The small clinic was already feeling claustrophobic, the walls closing in. She knew the power would likely go out soon, and the generators were unreliable. The door burst open, and old Mr. Abernathy, wheezing and clutching his chest, stumbled inside. It's coming, doctor," he gasped, his face pale. "The fire. It's everywhere." Maya helped him into a chair, quickly assessing his condition. His breathing was labored, his pulse erratic. She grabbed an oxygen mask and placed it over his face. "Just breathe, Mr. Abernathy. Breathe." Outside, the chaos was escalating. Elias, having parked his truck in the square, was shouting at the top of his lungs, trying to organize the growing crowd. "We need to get everyone to the community hall. It's the most fire-resistant building we have. Move. Now." But fear was a powerful intoxicant. Some people were frozen in place, paralyzed by terror. Others were running around aimlessly, their faces contorted with grief and despair. The wind howled, carrying with it the roar of the approaching flames, a sound like 1,000 hungry beasts. Maya, glancing out the window, saw the sky turn an even more ominous shade of red. She knew she couldn't stay here. She had a duty to the town, a duty to her patients. She grabbed her medical bag, already heavy with supplies, and took a deep breath. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "We're going to the community hall. Can you walk?" He nodded weakly, his eyes wide with fear. Maya helped him to his feet, and together, they stepped out into the inferno's embrace. The air stung their lungs, and the heat was almost unbearable. Havenwood was burning, and they were trapped. Voices of doubt. "Listen to me. Please." Elias Thorne's voice cracked, strained from shouting across the Havenwood town square. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, painting the scene in hues of orange and unease. He stood on the makeshift platform usually reserved for summer concerts, his face flushed, his usually neatly combed hair a wild mess. "The fire. It's coming fast. We need to evacuate. Now." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. A few faces were etched with fear, but mostly there were looks of skepticism, annoyance, and outright disbelief. Martha Hemlock, who ran the general store and had known Elias since he was a boy, folded her arms. Evacuate? Elias, calm down. The fire's miles away. We've seen fires before. The volunteer brigade will handle it. Miles? Martha, the wind's picking up. It could be here by nightfall. My brother called from the ridge. He saw it jump the creek. It's moving faster than anyone predicted. Elias gestured wildly towards the distant, hazy mountains. He could smell it now. A faint, acrid tang on the breeze, the smell of pine and smoke that promised destruction. A farmer, his face weathered and lined, spat on the ground. Leaving our homes? Our livelihoods? For what? Some smoke and a few embers. You're being hysterical, Elias. Others nodded in agreement. Years of living in the shadow of the mountains had bred a certain stoicism, a belief in their own resilience. They had faced harsh winters, economic downturns, and yes, even wildfires, and they had always persevered. This, they seemed to believe, would be no different. At a dark sedan, coated in dust, pulled into the square. Jason Statham stepped out, stretching his stiff limbs. He'd been driving for hours, seeking a quiet place to disappear. A place where his past couldn't find him. Havenwood, nestled in the mountains, had seemed perfect on the map. Now, the air hung thick with a strange, unsettling tension. He watched Elias, his urgency palpable, and then the crowd, their resistance almost a tangible force. Jason scanned the square, taking in the details. The volunteer fire station, a small, unassuming building, looked woefully inadequate. He saw no official presence. No police, no ambulances, just a man desperately trying to convince a group of stubborn villagers of an impending disaster. The faint smell of smoke tickled his nostrils. A grim confirmation of Elias's words. He walked towards the edge of the crowd, listening intently. He wasn't one for getting involved, but something about the situation felt deeply wrong. The level of complacency, the lack of official response, it didn't add up. He needed to understand the situation better. Anyone know where the fire is exactly? Jason asked, his voice low and gravelly, but carrying authority. At a few heads turned at a young man, no older than 20, with anxious eyes, pointed towards a small house on the edge of the square. Danny's been tracking it on his computer. He's got some kind of satellite feed. Jason nodded and made his way towards the house. Inside, Danny was hunched over his monitor, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The room was dimly lit, the only light emanating from the screen, illuminating his pale face. Maps flickered across the display, overlaid with red zones indicating the fire's spread. "It's bad," Danny said, his voice barely a whisper. "Really bad. The wind shifted an hour ago. It's heading straight for Havenwood. The official reports are outdated. They don't know how fast it's moving." He zoomed in on a particular area of the map. "Look, this is the South Ridge. If it crosses here." He trailed off, his eyes wide with fear. Jason leaned closer, studying the map. He didn't need to be a firefighter to understand the implications. The fire was closer and moving faster than anyone realized. He straightened up, a grim resolve hardening his features. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't the quiet escape he'd been seeking, but some instincts couldn't be buried. "Show me the evacuation routes," he said, his voice firm, "and then tell me what resources we have at our disposal. Ambulances, trucks, anything that can move people." He knew, looking at Danny's frightened face, that the official response, if it came at all, would be too little, too late. Havenwood was on its own, the only way out. Jason advanced, the coarse grit of the street clinging to his jacket's distressed leather. He'd sought anonymity in this forgotten place, a refuge from a life best left behind. But the wildfire, a ravenous vermilion beast clawing its way up the mountainside, had rewritten his plans. "There's another path," he declared, his voice a rusty hinge after years of silence. A wave of faces turned, mirroring a blend of apprehension and nascent hope. He gestured toward the saw-toothed peaks, now partially veiled by the encroaching haze. "The Devil's Tooth. It's a mountain pass. Barely a trail. Perilous, yes, but it offers passage to the other side to salvation." A ripple of unease spread amongst them. A crone, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, spoke up. The Devil's Tooth, abandoned for decades. Slides, sheer drops. It's suicide. I'm aware, Jason countered, his gaze encompassing their strained countenances. But the southern road is already compromised. We saw the Paul. We have hours, maybe less, before the inferno engulfs us. Remaining here is a funeral pyre. A tangible doubt settled, a palpable tension between dread and yearning. The Devil's Tooth was folklore. A cautionary legend. Theo attempt it was to embrace the improbable. Elias Thorne shouldered his way forward, soot smearing his features. He'd been tireless in his efforts to galvanize the villagers. He speaks truth, Elias rasped, his voice strained but resolute. I know that defile. The gamble is high, granted. But it's our lone recourse. We cannot await deliverance that will never arrive. His eyes beseeched each in turn. We must prevail. A cacophony erupted, a storm of voices swirling in doubt and fear. Some clung to the phantom of rescue. Others advocated fighting the blaze. Jason held his peace, his face a mask of neutrality, allowing Elias to steer the course. The villagers needed to hear the hard truths from one of their own. He noticed Maya Rodriguez peel away from the throng, making for the modest clinic. Even if some remained in denial, she understood the brevity of their remaining time. A blast of superheated air buffeted them as a fresh wind carried the acrid tang of scorched evergreens. The sun was a baleful orange eye, barely visible through the swirling murk. Maya reappeared, laden with bulky canvas packs, her brow creased with worry. I've assembled what I could, she announced, her tone firm and reassuring. Basic medical supplies, bandages, analgesics. Meager but essential. Her gaze locked with Jason's, a silent question in her eyes. How certain are you of this passage? As certain as desperation allows, he affirmed, meeting her scrutiny. It will be grueling. We must maintain cohesion, move with urgency, and will demand fortitude from each. There will be wounds, perhaps worse. The gravity of his words descended like a shroud. The Devil's Tooth was more than a treacherous route. It was wagering with mortality itself. Elias surged forward, his voice echoing with rediscovered strength. We will vote. Those favoring entrenchment step to my left. Those accepting the pass to my right. The villagers wavered, straddling the razor's edge between the known and the unknown. Slowly, tentatively, they began to gravitate at a young couple, babe in arms, edged toward Jason. Then a cluster of farmers, their faces etched with resolve. An ancient man, leaning on a gnarled cane, shuffled forward. The decision was rendered. The majority had cast their lot with the Devil's Tooth. Jason exchanged a knowing glance with Elias. Departure in 15 minutes. Jason commanded, his voice resonating. Gather essentials. Water, rations, blankets. And find your peace. Maya began dispensing the medical kits, her movements precise and soothing. She sensed the trials to come as the villagers dispersed. Jason approached Maya. My thanks, he murmured. She returned his gaze, her expression unyielding. Just lead them through this, she countered. That is paramount. He nodded, then turned towards the looming peaks, the Devil's Tooth obscured by the sepia shroud. The sole recourse was onwards, plunging into the maw of peril, trial by fire. The air tasted like ash and fear as the convoy lurched forward. Elias, perched on the hood of the lead jeep, bellowed instructions over the roar of the approaching firestorm. Keep your headlights on. Stay close. We lose anyone, we lose everyone. Jason gripped the steering wheel of the battered pickup truck, his knuckles white, behind him. The bed was crammed with terrified villagers, their faces streaked with soot and tears. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching Maya's eye. She offered a weak smile, her face masked with a thin layer of grime as she tended to a child coughing violently. The mountain pass was a gauntlet. Already, the fire had painted the sky a furious orange. Embers danced in the wind, landing on the vehicles like fiery confetti. The heat was intense, radiating through the metal skin of the truck. Suddenly, a crack like thunder echoed through the pass at a towering pine. Its roots weakened by the encroaching flames, groaned and toppled across the road ahead. Elias swore, leaping from the jeep. Jason, Get those axes from the back. We need to clear this now. Jason didn't hesitate as he barked instructions to the villagers in the truck bed and grabbed 2 axes. Tossing one to a burly farmer, sweat stung his eyes as they hacked at the burning wood. The air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning resin. The heat pressed down on them, suffocating and relentless. They worked in a frenzy, the axes biting deep into the wood finally. With a collective heave, they managed to drag the burning trunk to the side, creating a narrow passage. Elias, his face blackened with soot, waved them through. The convoy crawled forward, only to be met with another obstacle a mile further on. This time, it was a rockslide. The fire had loosened the earth, sending boulders tumbling down the mountainside. The road was choked with debris, impassable. "Danny, get that drone up," Elias yelled, his voice hoarse. "See if there's a way around." Danny, a young man usually glued to his phone, actually looked useful for once. He launched his drone, the small machine buzzing into the smoke-filled sky. The feed appeared on a small screen, showing a precarious path along the cliff edge, barely wide enough for the vehicles. "It's risky," Danny announced, his voice tight, "but it's the only way." Elias looked at Jason, his eyes filled with grim determination. "We don't have a choice." The convoy began to inch forward along the narrow path. The wheels of Jason's truck teetered on the edge of the cliff, a dizzying drop into the valley below. The passengers held their breath, their faces etched with terror. Then, chaos erupted. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the pass, fanning the flames. A wall of fire surged forward, engulfing the tail end of the convoy. Panic set in. A small group of villagers, huddled in the back of a flatbed truck, screamed and clawed at the sides. They jumped out, desperate to escape the inferno, and began running back the way they had come, away from the cliff edge. "No, stop!" Elias roared, but his voice was lost in the roar of the fire and the screams of the terrified villagers. They were running straight into the heart of the blaze. Jason slammed on the brakes, ignoring the protests of the villagers in his truck. He leaped out, his face set in a mask of grim determination. "Elias, get the convoy moving. I'll get them back." He plunged into the smoke and heat, chasing after the fleeing villagers. The fire was closing in, licking at his heels. He had to reach them before it was too late, before they were swallowed by the flames. The inferno roared around him, a trial by fire, testing the limits of his courage and his humanity. He ran towards it, into the inferno. Jason stared at the swirling orange sky, the inferno licking at the edges of the mountain ridge. The air tasted of ash and fear. He could hear the distant, desperate cries carried on the wind. "They're trapped," Maria yelled over the roar of the fire, her voice tight with panic. "The bridge is gone and no way out." He had been so close to slipping away, to disappearing into the anonymity of this forgotten corner of the world. He had come here to escape, not to become a hero. But looking at the faces etched with terror, at the raw helplessness in their eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. "How many?" he asked, his voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. 20, maybe 30, Maria replied, shaking her head. "Mostly women and children. The men are fighting the fire or trying to." He glanced at the meager supplies they had managed to salvage. Blankets, water, a handful of medical kits that it wouldn't be enough. But it was all they had. "I'm going in," he announced, the words hanging heavy in the smoky air. Maria gasped. "You're insane. It's suicide." "Maybe," he conceded, already stripping off his jacket and soaking a blanket in water. "But staying here is a death sentence for them." He looked at Maya, her face pale but resolute. "I need the strongest painkillers you have. And bandages. Lots of them." Maya didn't argue. She just nodded, her movements swift and efficient as she gathered what he needed. "Be careful, Jason," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He took the supplies, wrapping the wet blanket around his head and face, shielding himself as best he could. The heat was already intense, radiating outwards like a tangible force. He tested the wind, noting its erratic shifts. This was going to be hell. He moved quickly, his boots crunching on the scorched earth. The air grew thick and acrid, stinging his eyes and burning his lungs. He navigated through fallen trees, dodging showers of sparks that rained down from above. The fire was a living thing, a roaring beast consuming everything in its path. He found them huddled in the village square, a desperate knot of humanity surrounded by a wall of flames. Their faces were streaked with soot and tears, their eyes wide with terror. He barked out instructions, his voice hoarse and strained. "Keep low, cover your faces, we're going to move fast." Leading the way, he moved against the fire that he knew the mountain. The paths where a person might find shelter, temporary reprieve from the blaze. He pushed them onward, urging them to move, to not give up. A child stumbled, falling to the ground, and he scooped her up without breaking stride, her small body trembling in his arms. The heat was unbearable. His skin felt like it was melting. Smoke billowed around them, obscuring the path, choking their lungs. He guided them through narrow crevices, across rocky outcrops, using every trick he knew to shield them from the worst of the flames. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged on the other side of the ridge, into a patch of relatively clear air. The villagers collapsed, coughing and gasping, their bodies racked with exhaustion. Maya rushed forward, her face etched with relief. She quickly assessed the injured, her movements precise and practiced as she applied bandages and administered painkillers. The rescued villagers began to weep, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Jason stood apart, leaning against a tree, his body aching, his lungs burning. He was covered in soot, his clothes torn and singed, but he was alive, and so were they. Maya approached him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved them, Jason," she said softly. "You're a hero." He shook his head, rejecting the label. "I just did what needed to be done," he replied, his voice rough. He turned his gaze back towards the inferno, the flames still raging, a stark reminder of the chaos and destruction that lay behind them. He knew this wasn't over. The fire was still burning, and there was still much to be done. His escape would have to wait. The ravine's edge. The chasm split the earth, a jagged wound exposing raw rock and tenacious scrub. Before this daunting cleft, the convoy halted. Oxen bellowed, their frosty exhalations painting the still air hanging thick near the drop. What passed for a bridge resembled a decaying spine of splintered wood and tattered cord. A treacherous path across the dizzying void. It was a grim jest etched against the fading light. Elias Thorne, worry carving deeper lines into his face, addressed his people. "Here it is, the final hurdle standing between us and sanctuary. I will not sugarcoat it. The crossing appears perilous. We have no alternative. We must proceed." Though his voice wavered, a core of resolve ran beneath, a silent promise not to yield. Jason shouldered his way forward, his engineer's mind dissecting the span. Rot had consumed the main supports. Age had rendered the ropes that bound the platform together as brittle as glass. The anchor points themselves seemed on the verge of crumbling. This was a trap waiting to spring. "Everyone, stand clear," Jason barked, his tone leaving no room for argument, ignoring the curious stares and murmurs of apprehension. He concentrated solely on the task ahead, snatching a fallen branch. He probed the timbers. It disintegrated into powder at his touch. A curse escaped his lips. "Elias," he called, turning to the older man. "We need to bolster this thing, and fast. Gather every length of rope you can find, any sturdy branches, anything capable of bearing weight, and fetch me stones. We need to even the load." Without hesitation, Elias galvanized the villagers into action. Jason watched them scatter, a whirlwind of urgent motion fueled by the specter of destruction, ripping strips from his own tunic. He knotted them into impromptu ties. He scavenged relatively sound planks from the derelict wagons, dragging them toward the precipice. Time dissolved into a desperate struggle as dusk encroached. Jason toiled with fierce focus, his hands a blur of practiced motion. He bridged the weakest points with the salvaged planks, binding them with rope and cloth. Stones wedged beneath the supports offered a semblance of reinforcement, the effort drawing a grunt from his lungs. Dust swirled, mingling with the musty scent of decaying wood and the distant tang of embers. "It's fragile," Jason confessed to Elias, wiping grime from his forehead. "But perhaps strong enough. One individual at a time, slowly running, and for God's sake, no sudden movements." Elias nodded, his expression somber. "Children first," he directed, his voice regaining its former authority. "Then the infirm. We will follow." a girl, perhaps 7 years old, her face smudged with dirt and marked by fear, tentatively placed a foot on the bridge. Her small hand trembled as she gripped the worn rope serving as a rail. Jason inhaled sharply. His muscles coiled, ready to react at the slightest sign of failure. One step, then another. Her gaze locked on the opposite bank. She reached it. A collective breath escaped the assembled crowd. One by one, the villagers commenced their crossing. Each step marked a victory, each safe passage a triumph over gravity and fear. Jason's gaze swept across the structure, searching for telltale signs of stress, indications of imminent collapse. The timber groaned, the ropes whined, yet the hastily constructed reinforcement held. Elias was the last, on the far side. He paused, looking back at Jason, his eyes conveying a debt beyond words. "Thank you." He formed the words, the wind swallowing the sound. Jason merely nodded, his chest tight with mingled relief and exhaustion. He retreated from the edge, needing distance, needing to vanish once more as the final villager gained safety. A deep shudder vibrated through the ravine. The bridge quivered violently, the ropes parted like spider silk, and the rotting wood surrendered with a final, devastating roar. The entire structure plunged into the abyss, swallowed by the shadows. Jason stared into the void, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had succeeded. He had guided them to safety. But the bridge was gone. There could be no return at a new horizon. Dust-caked and spent, the last of the children stumbled onto the windswept plateau. Elias Thorne, chest heaving, gave Jason a rare, emphatic pat on the back, unusual for the reserved leader. "We all made it because of you." Jason tugged down his bandana, the word hero feeling like a foreign object lodged in his throat. He'd spent his life in flight, not pursuit. This felt alien. Or maybe a dormant part of himself was finally awakening. From their elevated sanctuary, the landscape sprawled, a majestic tapestry of peaks and valleys meeting the distant sky. Yet, the grandeur was muted by the unfolding catastrophe behind them. They had a clear view of what remained of Havenwood. A monstrous orange bloom licked at the heavens, devouring all it touched. The once picturesque village had become an inferno, a funeral pyre for homes and aspirations. The air tasted of charred timber and the bitter aftertaste of ruin. A wave of anguish washed over the exhausted group. Mothers drew their children close, their faces canvases of sorrow. Elders, eyes brimming but dry, leaned harder on their canes. Havenwood was more than structures. It was their shared past, their very identity, their heart. Elias stepped forward, his voice raspy but resolute. "It's gone," he stated, the words laden with finality. "But we remain. We are Havenwood, and we will rise again." Jason watched him, a spark of admiration igniting within. He'd anticipated despair, disintegration, utter chaos. Instead, he witnessed an unyielding spirit, a fierce will to endure. Maya Rodriguez, though her complexion was ashen, was already issuing commands, organizing the distribution of their meager salvaged medical supplies. "Danny, get those comms humming. Try and raise someone at the Oak Haven Refugee Center. We need supplies. Food, blankets, shelter, everything." Danny, fingers flying across his jury-rigged tech, his brow etched with focus, brought life to the salvaged equipment. After a flurry of adjustments, a static-laced signal buzzed to life. "Got contact." Patching through. Guilt gnawed at Jason. He could vanish into the wild, embrace the anonymity he so desperately craved. That had always been the plan. But could he truly abandon these people, this suddenly forged community? He scanned the faces around him. Gaunt with fatigue and raw fear, yet alight with resilience. He saw the steadfastness in Elias's gaze, Maya's unwavering dedication, and Danny's quiet determination. He glimpsed a future, not of solitary escape, but of shared hardship and rebuilding. "Elias," Jason said, his voice gravelly. "I'm staying put." Elias turned, his expression unreadable for a beat. Then, a slow smile widened his lips. "Figured you might. We need someone like you." "I know zero about rebuilding," Jason admitted. "But I can haul clear whatever's needed." "Then that's what you'll do?" Elias responded, clapping him heavily on the shoulder once more. "Welcome home, Jason." Maya approached, a small, weary smile gracing her face. "We're setting up a triage area over there that I could use your help sorting supplies." The subsequent hours dissolved into a vortex of activity. Jason labored tirelessly, moving stones, dressing burns, offering what comfort he could to the injured. A surprising sense of purpose bloomed within him. A feeling dormant for years as twilight draped the horizon in fiery hues. Danny announced that a convoy from the Oakhaven Refugee Center was en route, laden with supplies and volunteers. That a collective exhalation of relief swept through the makeshift camp. They weren't abandoned. Jason sat beside a meager fire, mesmerized by the dancing flames. Havenwood's destruction was a tragedy, an unbearable loss. Yet it was also an inception, a fresh canvas, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jason experienced a fragile flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could construct something of value here. Maybe he could finally forge a life worth inhabiting, not merely escaping.